deep inside the system. Wei had joined the Red Guards, a student paramilitary movement under Chairman Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution in 1966 when he was 16. His brother was best friends with Chinese President and Chairman of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping, when they were younger. Wei loved to say how the Chinese president was never that bright as a kid. He didn't think Xi was a great intellect as an adult either. When you have that much power, you don't have to be very bright, Dimon would comment. The bullies in the schoolyard, they are never very bright, but they have enough muscles to intimidate you. Despite his pedigree and connections, the Communist Party insider was thrown into prison in 1979. He had boldly penned a manifesto advocating democracy called the Fifth Modernization, posting it on the Democracy Wall in Beijing in 1978. In it, he called then-leader Deng Xiaoping a dictator. In a move that would seal his fate, Wei signed the essay with his own name and address. Perhaps feeling invincible, he also wrote a letter denouncing the inhumane conditions in Xinjiang prison. The Chinese Communist Party and Chinese police moved swiftly and made an example of him. Wei was subject to a televised trial before being thrown into prison. He was brutally tortured, beaten so severely he lost many of his teeth, starved, and confined to solitary isolation. He was left there under these unbearable conditions, forgotten by the outside world, or so it felt, for 14 long years. In 1993 he was set free against the backdrop of the PRC competing for the 2000 Olympics and trying to improve its image. But it would only be a brief release. His cruel treatment inside an assortment of China's brutal prisons only emboldened Wei to agitate harder against the Communist Party. When he was caught speaking to the visiting U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, John Shattuck, the following year, he was thrust back inside a dark, isolated cell. Shattuck was told repeatedly not to meet with Wei because Wei would be punished, but Shattuck wanted his headlines, Dimon says. Wei returned to interminable days of starvation and torture. He assumed he'd spend his wasted life in there. I have never seen him bitter or angry about his treatment, Dimon reflects. When I ask him, he says, "This is what I chose. I chose to resist." I think the only thing he feels guilty about is his family. He felt he brought a lot of suffering to his brothers and sisters and parents. They had their future destroyed, with a famous dissident as a brother. Bob Suettinger, a tough CIA operative, was then working in the Clinton White House as China Director of the National Security Council. In 1997, Bob sat down with the first secretary of the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., Liu Xiaoming, who went on to become ambassador to the UK until 2021, and miraculously negotiated Wei's release and deportation to the United States. Bob was renowned as a steely negotiator and had unparalleled expertise in the White House about the Chinese communist regime. No one could pull the wool over his eyes. He knew China wanted the West to open the market and was prepared to make unprecedented concessions, including releasing a famous prisoner. Wei's bombshell defection from China to America in 1997 made worldwide news. By the time he flew into New York City on November 16 that year, he was a celebrity. Once in the United States, it turned out Wei made the ultimate defector. He had a flawless photographic memory. He could recount vivid tales from inside the elite circles of the Chinese Communist Party with meticulous detail about their personalities and, crucially, their activities. The rare knowledge of an insider. Wei once told Dimon he could remember her New York phone number from when it was passed on to him during his brief release from prison in case he needed help. After he recounted it, Dimon had to go find an old address book to check if he was right. He was. In his new life in America,